Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations that are present in the 21st century media landscape, as well as all of the other areas of life that the media come into contact with, all of the ways that we participate in the information exchange here in the 21st century. We return tonight to our examination of the decline of the American education system. We have been learning about some of the people involved with the changes to our schooling that were implemented in the early part of the 20th century, which led to some concerning trends, ultimately bringing about the state of education today, which sees students in the United States lagging very far behind other young people in both developing and developed nations. Many of our cultural and societal problems are directly tied to the fact that our schools today do not teach our children how to think well at all. Instead, what is more the focus is how do the children feel and what kinds of things should they be concerned with in order to achieve the greatest amount of social acceptance in their lives, both as an individual and in the collective society that they live in. We have learned about John Dewey and Edward Thorndike, who took many of the philosophies and concepts of Wilhelm Wundt and the other students of the Leipzig laboratory known as experimental psychology. What we have discovered is that these men all shared a central unifying view that humans are nothing more than animals, and as such, we are able to be trained to behave in ways that achieve various desired outcomes. This idea spawned many methods of approach to achieve the programming ends that were being sought. What was achieved was a systematic approach aimed at understanding and controlling human behavior. Through the decades, the methods have been honed and they've been reworked into a super sophisticated machine, which has ties to some of the most powerful and influential groups and people in the world. In this video tonight, we will take a look at some of the ways in which the psychological conditioning programs implemented in the school system were able to flourish and become so ubiquitous across the country. As we go through this information, it's good to take note of some of the ways that influence and power were used to achieve certain goals. In order for a very large system to change, a significant amount of time needs to pass. Along with time, we may ask what forces drive the most effective and beneficial changes to large-scale systems. We can look at many factors such as scalability, specificity, funding for resources, and various kinds of momentum within the current and future trajectories of the system itself. This topic is an important one to consider when we think about the ways education in the U.S. was fundamentally morphed from the inside out. It took thousands of years to accumulate the collective knowledge and understanding which underpinned the schooling of the 19th and very early 20th centuries. The curriculums of the 1800s were designed to build up a child's reasoning skills through immersion in the classical subjects of mathematics, language skills and reading, and the natural sciences. That time for development yielded a highly intelligent population that was able to collectively establish one of the greatest civilizations in the history of the world. The educational foundations which helped underpin the philosophies of our constitutional republic are a high watermark for human rights, opportunities for people, liberty, and the freedom to create and develop a life which is lived to the highest value and meaning that any person may wish to achieve. With so much force behind that system of education, how was it possible to take a thriving system and shift it so dramatically in the span of just a couple of decades. To understand what happened, we need to examine the cultural mood surrounding the richest man in America at the end of the 19th century. By the mid to late 1800s, John D. Rockefeller had amassed a fortune that placed him at the top of the food chain regarding financial power in the United States. By 1910, the Rockefeller wealth was standing at roughly $800 million, which, adjusted for inflation, would be the equivalent to roughly $24.5 billion today. Rockefeller had garnered a reputation for his ultra-shrewd and often dubious and subversive business tactics. He once stated that he had a God-given gift for making money, and as such, he believed it was his duty in life to continue to do so. His company, Standard Oil, had become a dominating force in the world of business and industry. While we may never know if his penchant for making money was divinely ordained, Rockefeller's wealth, along with his various business holdings, was growing at rates that were well beyond his control, and the public opinion did not hold the oil tycoon in high regard. These converging problems, for at least John D., led to the decision that Rockefeller would hire out assistants to help clean up his public image, while at the same time work to manage his growing wealth in ways which allowed for continued growth, but also aided in the public relations campaign that was being undertaken. Rockefeller befriended a man named Frederick Taylor Gates, who was a Baptist minister with ties to the Pillsbury Flour Company and their philanthropic dealings. Gates's experience in this field and his directness in handling finances was what impressed Rockefeller at the time and led him to hire Gates for the position of handling all of Rockefeller's philanthropic decisions. Gates clearly saw the present problem with the public opinion of the Rockefellers, as well as the potential dangers associated with such vast wealth accumulation. He would remark, "I trembled as I witnessed the unreasoning popular resentment at Mr. Rockefeller's riches, to the mass of people a national menace. It was not, however, the unreasoning public prejudice of his vast fortune that chiefly troubled me. Was it to be handed on to posterity as other great fortunes have been handed down by their possessors, with scandalous results to their descendants and powerful tendencies to social demoralization? I saw no other course but for Mr. Rockefeller and his son to form a series of great corporate philanthropies for forwarding civilization in all its elements, in this land and all lands. Philanthropies, if possible, limitless in time and amount, broad in scope, and self-perpetuating." Prior to employing Gates as his philanthropic financial advisor, Rockefeller had supplied an endowment for the rebuilding of the University of Chicago to the tune of $600,000. It was through this charitable relationship that Rockefeller and Gates' relationship actually became realized. Gates recognized that Rockefeller's involvement with the rebuilding of the university had done well to polish up his reputation, while providing an avenue for a healthy return on his investment through the access and influence that the endowment had provided Rockefeller with respect to how the funds would be utilized. It was decided that in order to do the larger public relations overhaul and secure the family fortune from destruction in the future, the realm of education would be the direction to focus the Rockefeller family philanthropy. Even prior to Edward Bernays, the concept of public relations was well understood by the more powerful and savvy individuals seeking control of the minds of the people. The issue with this, at the time, was that the broader education system of the country was working incredibly well and was not in need of the kinds of financial influx that Gates was attempting to exert. Most of the cities in the country had well-established educational systems that were set up in the early days of the country. The literacy rate of the citizens of the U.S. far exceeded what we see today, and most people in the bustling and growing nation were highly educated, a factor that played a crucial role in the booming period of economic growth during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Where the lack was present, however, was in the rural South, which was still recovering from the fallout of the Civil War and the reconstruction of that region both economically and culturally. It was actually John D. Rockefeller Jr. who saw the opportunity to enact his family goals by targeting the region and capitalized on the small but growing education institutions developed by other philanthropies under the Peabody and Slater funds. Peabody would later be subsumed by the J.P. Morgan and Company. These groups had established schools aimed at educating rural black children with the aims of preparing them to enter into the industrial and agricultural workforce. John Jr. was particularly interested in establishing a Negro Education Board, as it meant a controlling interest in the directions of the southern region economically. But soon he realized that philanthropic visions for his family would best be served by broadening this to more than just one race. After convincing his father of this direction, John Jr., along with Gates and the other philanthropies existing in the South, established the General Education Board. As Gates put it, the object of this association is to provide a vehicle through which capitalists of the North, who sincerely desire to assist in the great work of Southern education, may act with assurance that their money will be wisely used. Since the Rockefeller arm of the board was the most robust from a sheer numbers standpoint, they effectively created a philanthropic monopoly. The initial investment from the Rockefellers was over $1 million, which guaranteed the family's majority stake in the direction of this new Board of Education. To better illustrate what the real goals of this new General Education Board were, we may look to the words of Frederick T. Gates himself. Quote, "In our dreams, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we will work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple as well as a very beautiful one: to train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are. So we will organize our children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way, in the homes, in the shops, and on the farm." These men saw clearly the advantages that funneling their wealth into philanthropic trusts provided. By establishing these trusts, it would ensure that they never were without an ever-accumulating stream of wealth regeneration through interest and investment, which was to be guaranteed by establishing the appearance of charitable and altruistic motivations. The PR campaign would be a huge success and provide the Rockefellers, more specifically John D. Jr., a perfect avenue to enact their plans for social control. John Jr. was coming into his own, and with the help of Gates, was expanding his father's vision and fortune into larger and more effective ways to secure the family wealth from attack, while cementing their personal views that they were divinely ordained to make money and grow personal autocratic wealth and power. In short order, the vast funding of the General Education Board would be made available to the experimental psychologists and their visions for a socialist utopia. We will continue to examine the influence enacted on the population of America next week, with the convergence of wealth and power with the psychological conditioning programs developing at Teachers College. Until then, stay safe, check in on your loved ones, and stay diligent and vigilant with your minds on guard.